I was reading that in some of your previous work, you actually had a role that was in circulation of news, which I thought was
Hmm.
very interesting, especially
Hmm.
what we just talked about before we hopped on. What do you think is the biggest problem with circulation of news today and how it's impacting teenagers?
Okay. I think the problem is whoever's in charge of technology in terms of news these days, they're in charge of the story and they're in charge of the narrative that goes out there. We have a number of wars going off in the world at the moment, but we also have a significant um, unrest in Africa, in the Congo, but nobody hears about that. And so I think the problem is that we are the stories that we feed our minds. So whatever you tune into is going to influence you.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a balance in which being able to figure out whether it's the truth, it's fiction, it's a combination of the two, it's very hard to know what to believe. And also, I believe the way a lot of the news feeds work, they're fear based because that triggers that interest in us because it taps into our survival mechanisms. We want to know if there's a war going on. We want to know if there's a disaster around the corner because we need to keep ourselves safe.
Mhm.
But I think that has a really negative impact in terms of our stress and anxiety levels, which doesn't help. I think you can have a story that happens on the other side of the world and it feels so real when you hear it, even though you're in a different place. It makes you feel like it's happening around the corner. And so again, that triggers more stress in a way that never would have been the case before because you wouldn't have heard that story.
Yeah.
And I also think there's a real problem, or there potentially is going to be a real problem around AI. What are we going to see? What can we trust? And the less trustful we are of our fellow humans, the less we interact, the less we connect, the more lonely we're going to become.
Yeah.
The more we're going to go into our burrows and stay in the safe and trusted space and not widen our horizons. It amazes me, actually. I come from Ireland, so it hasn't quite hit there in the same way, thank goodness, where you can walk down the road and kids will still say hi to a stranger. They'll look you in the eye. But when I'm walking around here in the UK, they won't look at you.
No.
And I think if we as humans can't connect in a meaningful way, we're going to have more loneliness. And we know it's at epidemic levels already in developed nations. Um, and, loneliness is a foundation stone for addiction, for self-harm, for mental health issues, and also suicide.
No.
So yeah, I think we need to be very careful about what we feed our minds. And I actually believe news providers have a responsibility now to be really careful about what they pump out there into the world. We need a balance of the good and bad
Yeah.
because there's so much good that goes on in the world that we don't get to hear about.
Yeah. But like you said, the bad sells. That's what gets clicks. That's
Hmm.
what gets people to tune into the networks and gets the ratings and what makes the money.
Mm,
That's an unfortunate way of how the world is, but it's all structured around money.
it is.
And AI is one of those things too. It's in its infancy still, but how it's going to be used, I can only imagine how it's going to be used in the upcoming US election and that news cycle, how it's already being used to create these deep fakes of politicians and spread false news, false awareness. And then even when it comes to loneliness, there's new AI bots that you can talk to and supposed to be like your friend. All these crazy things in the world of AI that are just increasing this distortion on what reality is. And one of the more fascinating statistics I was reading when I was going through your work was that, 80% of young people are vulnerable to depression and anxiety, but they're also vulnerable to disillusionment.
Mm,
And that's a term that I don't think gets discussed nearly enough. I think depression and anxiety have certainly come more into the forefront, but disillusionment, even when I think about my own life in a more positive context. I would watch media that would depict adulthood as, oh, wonderful relationships. You're going to be so happy with a wife or a husband, kids. Your friends are constantly going to be around, and then it's not like that at all. Especially for some people, it's a very lonely life once you get out on your own, start working a job. There's no husband, no wife, no kids, no friends around. And that disillusionment and that disconnect with the world certainly has the same kind of impact as a disillusionment from, my best friend's an AI chatbot. I can't even I can't even say that sentence seriously, but maybe that's the case for some people, especially in the future. What would you say disillusionment's impact is on teenagers nowadays? Is there one massive disconnect that they have from their own version of the world versus how the world really is?
I think the biggest problem with disillusionment is that they see this perfect world beyond them with what they feed themselves on social media when they do
Hmm.
all the social comparisons.
Yeah.
And we know it's fiction, but so many of them don't have the experience to be able to recognize truth from fiction. And the thing is, if we don't feel we have an 80% chance of achieving a goal and a 20% chance of failure, you won't even bother.
No.
So if you see everything being so perfect presented to you, and you're sitting at home and going, my life's just not like that. I'm letting my parents down. I'm not doing well at school. I don't know who I am. Actually, you know what? It makes you not want to get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
And then when we get into that state, we often don't want to talk to people about how we're feeling because we kind of retreat into ourselves. And so for me, that's the real problem of disillusionment. And what we really need to do is we need to create kind of the opportunity for meaningful connection, not the Marilyn Monroe smiles that we see every day. If you looked at social media, you wouldn't think there was a problem with mental health in the world, but we know there is.
Yeah.
And that shows the disconnect and the disillusionment. But if you have a sense of purpose, if you have a sense of knowing who you are, knowing what your talents and strengths are, which absolutely everybody does, even though the education system doesn't always nurture that. It's so busy filling you up with so much information from the outside. I believe it doesn't empower young people to know who they are on the inside. And if we can create those trusted spaces where young people actually can connect for real, where they can talk about their problems, when they can say, I'm not confident all the time, where they can have a trusted adults say, yeah, I suffer stress. Do you think I show up here every day and feel fantastic? Hell no, I don't.
Probably not.
Believe me, marriage is hard. Kids are hard. But the thing that's going to make you feel good is if you have a sense there's a reason for you getting out of bed and it's a purpose. And if you can find one that's beyond yourself,
Yeah.
a bit what you're doing here today, Tom. You do
Hmm.
this as a hobby. You
Hmm.
love it. You love to connect with people. You love to get, you know, new views and perspectives out in the world. That's serving a real purpose for a lot of people to be able to tune into that, to
Hmm.
connect with the truth. And for me, that's what the human experience is all about. It's living in truth and
Yeah.
dealing with it and sharing our triumphs and our struggles together.
Yeah.
But pretending everything's fabulous when you're feeling awful, it's such a hard mask to wear.
Yeah. And I thank you for the kind words there. And it's true. I started this as a way to almost create like therapy sessions for myself, where I hear other people's perspective on the world, and it helps put everything into perspective for me and what purpose really means to me. And that is human connection in my mind. This connection that we have with the world and that we have with each other. I don't think there's anything really more important at the end of the day. There's pursuits of monetary success. There's pursuits of I'm sure there's monetary success is number one for a lot of people. So there's pursuits of that definitely, but what does that get you at the end of the day? Um, Nothing compared to what relationships do. And I think that's something young people are certainly detracted from nowadays in the digital age, where it's so easy to form a parasocial relationship where they see their favorite YouTuber or their favorite movie star and they befriend them without the friendship being reciprocated. They create friends online that they'll never actually meet in person. And while I do think, that's great and there's a purpose for that, it's completely different than making friends in person.
Hmm.
And I think also part of that disconnect can be parenting too, where the education system certainly doesn't help us the way that I believe it should help us find purpose and help us find our talent. But sometimes our parents can be the same kind of way. If they have a vision for how they want us to live our lives, and they can dictate us down a certain path instead of allowing us to make mistakes, to learn what we like, to find something and then flourish in it. Some parents, unfortunately, aren't able to provide that for a child. And, part of the disconnect I want to talk about first is the disconnect between parents and how they view children's lives growing up in the digital age versus how children actually grow up in the digital age. Because I still think there's a massive disconnect between what it's actually like to be someone who's grown up with social media and technology in your face 24/7 versus someone who's observing it from the outside. And they don't even fully understand what their kids are getting up to when they're on social media, what they're talking about, what that lifestyle is even like. So, how have you seen that in your own work? And what are some strategies parents can go about recognizing certain trends in their kids and kind of understanding their kids more?
I think the most important thing is to realize as a parent that the world you grew up in is not the world that your teenagers are growing up in.
Mhm.
I think you also need to realize that part of those teenage years is about, spending more time with their peers. They
Yeah.
want to hang out with their friends more than they want to hang out with you. And that's normal because that's part of the mother nature preparing them to leave the nest so they go on and, you know, are able to survive outside the home, able to develop their own values, have a sense of who they are.
Yeah.
But the problem is we don't let them run around anymore. We just don't let them out anymore. So part of the problem of them being on social media and connecting with their friends online and being on digital devices all the time is because we've created a world of fear. And
Mhm.
so the only way that they are really able to connect a lot of the time is to go on their devices. So we've created that as adults. They haven't created that. So I
Mhm.
think we have to take responsibility for that one.
Yeah.
I think you also need to be aware that devices are highly addictive. Social media is highly addictive. It's been what I see is it's been parents really frustrated because their kids won't come off it. And I go, well, it's like a hypodermic needle.
Yeah.
You wouldn't give your kids drugs, you wouldn't give them alcohol, but they're on devices and they're as addictive because they've been designed that way.
Mhm.
Because, it's somebody's eyes and their attention. That's where these big tech companies make their money.
Yeah.
So you need to have some sympathy for them. um, I think what really needs to happen with parents is that they've got to always understand when they're pushing their children, are they coming from a place of fear or are they coming from a place of love? Are you empowering your child to be who they need to be, or are you pushing them to be someone you want them to be?
Yeah.
It's a really important question. And I
Yeah.
always say to parents, you've been given your life to live. You need to be sure to empower them to live theirs. You know, there's one statistic um, where a lot of people may say, I want my kid to be a doctor, I want them to be a lawyer, I want them to be this, that, and the other. In the caring professions or in professions, one of the highest suicide risks are doctors, are dentists. These things are callings. So be careful what you wish for your children.
Mm.
Understand they're good enough. In fact, they're unique. There's no one else like them. And you should celebrate that. And it's your job to empower them to know who they are. So you can set them off on a path that's going to be aligned with them, where they can find a purpose to serve. Because if you can do that, that is the best kind of life.
Yeah.
And it's your job to do that. So don't bring your stresses and fears to the party. You know, don't make it so easily accessible when they're younger that they're on devices like a babysitting service, because it's going to come back and bite you.
Yeah.
Get them out there experiencing life, get them out there involved in sport, get them out there, doing voluntary work where they can, engage with people for real.
Yeah.
try and get their friends around to your house and try and get them around to your friend's house, and have a discussion that there's no devices when they're together,
Yeah.
because it's actually quite rude.
It is.
There was a time when these things, a lot of this technology came out. It would be so rude if you took your phone out at the table. It isn't anymore, but it should be.
Yeah.
It's like we can't have a conversation without a device in our hands to kind of help us engage.
Yeah.
And I think we're losing that art. So I don't know if I quite answered your question, but I think when we blame our children that they don't come off their devices, understand they're addictive.
Yeah.
Understand, we've created the environment in which that's how they go, and that's where they go to connect with their friends.
Yeah.
If you want them to do less of it, you need to find other ways that they can connect with their friends in a healthier environment.
Yeah. When I think about having phones at the dinner table, I just think, well, step one is actually getting everyone at the dinner table nowadays.
Mm.
How many families don't even sit down for dinner anymore? And one of my favorite sections of your work was on connection blockers, and phones are certainly a connection blocker. If I walk into a conversation, and even if I see a phone down on the table, it could be face up, it could be face down, I automatically see that as a connection blocker. Like, there's maybe at least 5% of you not engaged in this conversation right now. You're just waiting for your phone to go off so you have an excuse to get out of the conversation. That to me is something that I find very annoying, where
Mm.
it doesn't matter who I'm speaking with. If I want to have a genuine conversation with you, if this is like the only time I have to see you this month, this year, I don't want to know that part of you isn't invested in the conversation. And I'm sure kids feel the same way about their parents. If I were to see my parents have their phone face down at the dinner table, I would be thinking the same thing, especially at the phase of life I am now, where I only come home so often. I would say, we only have so much time together. Why are you 50% checked out, 25% checked out? And one of those other connection blockers that you had referenced, for me, that really struck me when I read it was transference, where a parent will have their own experiences, they'll have their own worries and anxieties, and sometimes unknowingly, they'll transfer those same anxieties, those same worries over to their children. And that will craft the narrative that the child has about themselves, and that will craft the lifestyle that the child lives. And I think transference is such a danger because we don't even know we're doing it sometimes. We don't even know that some of our reactions are based off of our own fears, our own experiences. Has there been an instance where you've seen that in your own life? Maybe someone has done that to you or you've done that to your children. And are there any signs someone can pay attention to? So if they're subconsciously transferring, they can begin realizing
I think, I think, I think what's interesting about that is transference is one thing,
that. Hmm.
but we have so many unconscious biases at work. I think I listed about 30 of them in the
Yeah,
book.
I think it was
You
like
know,
36 of them. Yeah.
so that's just one. One of the main things we can do is generalizations. Oh, this is just how it is.
Hmm.
We delete information. We distort information. Delete. Nobody loves me. Really? Nobody? We distort information as well, and there's transference. I'm trying to think. I think one way you can do it, transference, I've done it, is a particular name, and I'm going to make up the name. So I'm not highlighting anyone. So if we just think of the name Mary, I know someone called Mary, and Mary is not someone I liked. I didn't have a good experience from them, and I'm recognizing traits in you that remind me of Mary. So I'm kind of thinking you could be like her. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
absolutely.
So we do this stuff all the time. Again, it's a lack of awareness. We've got thinking errors that we engage in, unconscious biases that we're involved in, and if you don't have an awareness of them, then we basically, from our own stories, create all the stories that we don't want in our lives. And that's
Hmm.
why getting back to the truth of what's going on is so important. Um, and I think it's very hard for us as humans to be fully objective, but we should strive to be objective. And we can only do that through self awareness and taking self responsibility for what we create.
Yeah.
Because for every action we take, there is a reaction.
No.
And so it's being conscious of our intentions and what we want to create in our relationships. Is what I'm saying and doing and behaving creating that? Or am I in a knee-jerk reaction because you're triggering something in me, some past baggage that I feel I'm being attacked, or you're making it all about me.
No.
So I think first there has to be the understanding of all those factors, and that's why I dedicated a whole chapter to them. Um, and I think we transference can happen all the time, but I think we shouldn't look at it in isolation. We need to look at all the other things that we do as well. And it's about questioning the truth. I think what's really important too to understand is that we have access to 11 billion bits of information per second. That's what's out there. But our
Mhm.
conscious mind can only process 4,000 or so. And we often are stuck in that 4,000 bits of information. And if we can't flex and start to, become more aware and open our minds to other information that's there rather than being stuck in our old thinking patterns and beliefs and our subsequent emotions and behaviors,
Yeah.
um, we will disservice ourselves and stop us getting to the truth.
Yeah.
So understanding that we all uniquely operate in our own view of the world is really important. That's often a massive misconception, whereby something happens, you behave that way, and I don't understand why you behave that way because that's not how I would behave. Well,
Yeah.
they're operating from a different, unique view of the world, and you need to step into that world and say, okay, I'm curious rather than judging. I'm curious why you behave like that. Can you tell me what's going on in your world? Because I can't get in there unless you tell me.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how that can really open up clear, cleaner, less confrontational communication if we go with curiosity first rather than judgment.
Yeah. I know for me, it's been an interesting relationship between self-examination and self-perception,
Hmm.
where I began my own journey and I would create bits of information about myself and then become super self-critical.
Hmm.
So I would say to myself, "Oh, you're not in a relationship. That must mean there's something wrong with you." And I would try to analyze over and over again and try to find what was wrong with me. And that led me down that very negative cycle where I would be constantly stuck in that loop over and over again. And it wasn't really until I started to be open with these emotions, be open with these feelings, and just ask people their own opinion on how they go about viewing relationships and how they go about viewing themselves, where I could express that curiosity and I could see that I wasn't the only person that had these emotions and had these feelings. And then once it was one person turned into 10 and then 20 and then so forth. And it ties back to what we were talking about earlier. When you're in that cycle, like I was, that very negative cycle, and you combine that with a sense of loneliness, that to me is how that cycle becomes unbroken and it continues to revolve and revolve. And you get to the point where you start to lose any sense of purpose that you might have had before. And you start to lose any passion that you might have had before. And this is part of the reason why I continue to do this is opening myself up to new ideas and new curiosities and hearing new stories because we all have a story and everyone's story is equally as beautiful as the other story. There's no hierarchy here, which is a beautiful thing. We're all humans and we all have similar experiences. So I want to ask you if you're comfortable talking about your own experience with the negative cycle, if it's impacted any loved ones that you have, if it's impacted yourself, and just strategies that you've had if you've ever found yourself in that place and how you go about making your way out of it.
Sure. I think I think when I was, I've been on the planet a while now, so when I was younger, I think things were easier. I think there was less pressure. However, I think that I kind of got to my 30s, was going through a very difficult divorce. And I kind of woke up one morning and thought, how did I get here? Have I wandered around life without any kind of, you know, mode of direction, On the outside, everything would have looked wonderful. But I got to a point where I thought, I'm in a relationship that is not working. I have a very small son, a 1.5 year old son, and I know I can't stay. Um, and I made a decision to leave, and I ended up working for a race team.
Hmm.
And what was really interesting about that was, racing drivers, they're smart people because they have to be tuned in to be able to optimize their performance, and they have to be in a good state of well-being to drive cars at very fast kilometers or miles an hour around a racetrack. Otherwise you're going to kill yourself.
Yeah.
um, but what I discovered soon after was that I'd left a job in London that I'd loved, but I knew I wanted to go to the country move into the country with my young son to be able to have what I felt was a healthier kind of life for him. And I started working for this race team, but not long after, the owner went bankrupt, and I was like, "What do I do now? I've left a job. This is the days before you could just pick up a job anywhere. I've left a job behind me that I knew everybody in. I'm in a place I don't know very many people. My family, I was Irish living in the UK, so my family weren't there. How am I going to put food on the table?" And I started to feel super stressed, lonely, and, anxious. How am I going to feed my kid? How am I going to keep a roof on my head, over our heads? And one day I kind of woke up and thought, why aren't the racing drivers behaving like this? Because they're not running around like a headless chicken like me. And what they were really good at was focused on being super present,
Hmm.
really good at being focused on what they wanted to achieve, really good at directing their energy and attention on what they wanted to create while still having a laugh, while still maintaining well being, really good at being comfortable in their own skin. And I thought, I need to do more of this. And what I learned over time, and it's been a while since then, is that actually we are complete, we are connected, but the stories we tell ourselves disconnect us from that reality. We are nature. And if we feel separate, it's the story we tell ourselves about that separateness. We tell ourselves that we need somebody else to complete us when actually we don't. And often I find when you find purpose and meaning in what you do, and you're comfortable in your relationship with yourself because you know who you are, you know what you're about, you know what you want to achieve, everything else flows. When you are in a state of just being happy with what you've got, even if there's all sorts of rubbish going on around you, and you can maintain that calm, and you can maintain that sense of, I suppose, gratitude and
Yeah.
belief and a trust that things will be okay, then your energy changes and what you bring into your life changes. Because rather than being stuck in stress and anxiety, where your ability to see how you can solve your problems is limited because all your energy is going on survival,
Yeah.
when you can calm everything down, no matter what's going on, when you can believe, when your intentions are clear, your energy is much more, it vibrates at a much higher level. We know that emotions can be measured in terms of vibrational energy.
Yeah.
And when we're in those lovely ones like love, feeling empowered, being able to engage in reason, we feel so much better. When we're in guilt, shame, fear, we feel lousy because we're not generating as much energy. And the bridge between the two is courage. So, one thing that I think is really important, if you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling you're not enough, if you're feeling, you know, that nobody loves you, ask yourself this rather than dwelling on that story, which is that gremlin on your shoulder, um, ask yourself, what action can I take that will put me into courage for me to get more of what it is that I want? And it might just be, I'm going to pick up the phone to my family. I'm going to call an old friend. I'm going to go and do some volunteering work where I can help someone else. Anything to get you out of your story where you can empower yourself and you can empower others will absolutely make you feel better.
I love that. I really do love that. If you had to summarize, what's the story you tell yourself right now? Is there like a mantra that you repeat to yourself, or is it more fleshed out than that?
I think the story I tell every morning I wake up, I go into gratitude mode no matter what's going on. Absolutely. Um and I think my story is the only moment that I have to worry about right now is this one.
Yeah.
I know I have a clear vision about what I want to create. I don't have to have it all worked out. And if I'm in fear, which I often am, I don't have all the answers. I'm not, superhuman. If I'm in fear, I just have to do the next obvious thing and get on with it. And I'll see where that takes me. But I'm very focused on what I want to achieve. And also, I'm very focused on looking after my children because I have a real motivation to do what I do because I love my children. And I know so many other parents around the world love their children too. And it's taken me years to learn a lot of these skills, and I just think every parent should have them. They need new tools in their toolkit. And if there's something I can do to save a life,
Yeah.
a young life out there, to make a young life better, then that's a life well worth living, and that's what inspires me every day.
One line from the book that really struck me was parents are constantly looking to keep their children alive physically, but they also need to keep them alive mentally.
Hmm.
What does that look like to you on a daily basis, keeping them alive mentally?
So I'm going to answer that with another one liner, which
Go
is
for it.
something that my 4-year-old son said to me. And I think I opened the book with it. It's all about love, Mum. You just have to fill your heart with love. And
Hmm.
he said that to me as a 4-year-old in the car when I was backing into our driveway. And that's when I was going through a very difficult divorce. He didn't know that. But I thought, don't doubt the wisdom of your children. They tell you what they need. And don't let your fear and stress get in the way, because stress is not your best friend as a parent. It won't serve you and it won't serve your children. Try and find as many joyful moments as you can in your day for yourself and together with your children. And you'll create a totally different energy, a totally different kind of relationship that's not dependent on X, Y, and Z.
Hmm.
It's just dependent on you being happy that they are who they are, that they're the amazing, unique human they are, and you're doing your best. So for me, it's all about love. You just have to fill your heart with love, because when we operate from a place of heart and love, our decisions are way better than if they come from a place of fear.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about before writing in a joy journal. Is that still something you engage in, or?
It's an exercise I get actually. I do for a lot of young people I coach,
Mhm.
because of the fact that our brain loves to go through the old tried and tested,
Yeah.
the old neural pathways. And because we can tap into so much information, but we tend to tap into what we're used to. So an example I would use, and obviously not everyone buys cars or has babies, but I'm going to use these examples. So if you're about to have a baby, or you find out you're pregnant, you can bet your bottom dollar you'll start to see pregnant women all over the place.
Oh yeah.
If you want to buy a new phone, say for example, or you want to get a new car, all of a sudden your brain starts to tune in to see more of that around the place. And so what that tells us is that we can direct our minds to look for stuff that we wanted to look for.
Mhm.
Now we have a choice. We can spend all day thinking about the awful things that are happening to us, or the things that don't make us feel good, depending on where we let our thoughts and our emotions go. and the beliefs around that. Or we can tell our brain when we wake up every morning, I want you to find me moments of joy. And I want you to find me 10 moments of joy every single day. And it can be the simplest thing. It can be the smell of freshly cut grass. It can be the smell of your first cup of coffee, if that's what you like in the morning. It can be the laughter of a child. It can be a smell of a perfume. It can be anything simple. But the objective is to create your diary of joy, is that for 10 consecutive days, or 2 weeks probably is even better, you find 10 things in your day that bring you joy. And you tell your brain that that's what you want them to find. Now, you might struggle initially. And then at the end of every day, you write these down, and then ask yourself, which ones bring me the most joy out of all the ones I've listed? Because that starts to tell you what makes you feel good. And that's
Yeah.
programming your brain to look for that. Now, you may not get 10 initially, but you will over time. And again, it's just about our brains, if they're left to their own devices, are like untrained puppies.
Hmm.
And you want to train the puppy so that it does what you want it to do, not what it wants to do. Because it's such a powerful, I call it our superpower. If we have a calm mind, it's a superpower that we can tap into.
Yeah.
And we know that it's possible to train our brains.
It's almost like a muscle, like anything else. That's why I make such an effort now to work on my mental health just as much as my physical health. Because
It,
maybe I can get to a point one day where I'm like, oh, my mental health's great. But if I stop training it, just like if I were to stop training in a gym or if I stopped going for runs, uh, health's going to come back down to a level it was beforehand.
yeah.
Um, and I really like that idea. Joy to me is something that's so tied up in the little things, like you just said. And I was in such a cycle where I was looking for these grand gestures, these grand, phenomenal sights to find joy in, but that's not how daily life works. You have to be able to find it in those small little moments. And I know a lot of people listening to the show might not even be parents. They're probably around my age. And every time I talk to a parent, I always try to ask them a similar question about the relationship that they have with their kids, because there's such a rhetoric, talk about news circulation that we see in social media. There's such a rhetoric nowadays, especially for where I am in New York and the coastal cities in the United States. Don't have kids. Just pursue your career, focus on yourself, try to do everything that you can by yourself. And every time I talk to a parent, they always disagree. They're like, the greatest joy that I have in my life is my kids. So if you just have a couple words to talk about the impact parenthood has had on your ability to feel joy when you're with your kids, and even when you're not with your kids, you find joy in the work that you do because it's helping your kids and it's helping other people's kids, and you're living a life that has that sense of purpose.
Well, my kids bring me joy every day. And I learn from them every day because they're so smart. They don't have all the baggage that I've gathered along the journey. Do you know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
so good at saying the obvious, but we start teaching them not to say their truth very early on. You can't say to Auntie Betsy that she smells, even though if it's the truth. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
we start to condition about what's possible, what you can say, what you can't say. So yeah, I love. I honestly, my children, they're a driving force for me because they make me realize what I'm capable of. Because I do so much. I do things for myself, but I do most things for my children. Um, and I just love the fact that they can live in the moment. They teach us that. You don't see young children looking at schedules. I love the fact that they teach us that they can play with whatever they have in front of them and they can find joy in that. They
Mhm.
don't need, all the systems and all the gizmos and all that. They don't need any of that stuff.
Yeah.
I love the fact that they love the rain, but we learn not to like it.
Yeah.
And they like to dance in the rain and splash in the rain. They like to get, muddy, but we learn not to like all that stuff. I love the fact that they embrace nature and they're happiest running around free in it. Um, I just love the conversations. Um, yeah, I just love those conversations. I mean, they yeah, they teach me. I suppose they just teach me every day new stuff about how we should be living. And what happens is that we start off that way, but for some reason on the journey, we pick up all these really crazy bad habits.
Yeah.
And then we almost have to reprogram ourselves the other end to be able to tune back into the well being that children naturally have.
Yeah. It's something I'm trying to work on too, as one of my new mental health initiatives is trying to recapture that childlike wonder, that childlike sense of freedom where I don't feel tied down by the world. I don't feel tied down by rhetorics that are thrown my way from 100 different avenues. Just embracing everything for what it is and the
Mm.
beauty that's in this world.
Hmm.
I can't thank you enough for today. This was a really good way to start my day. That's for sure. And I want to finish off. It's a question I ask everybody, but I think it's really fitting based off what we just talked about. And it's, what have you learned about love in particular? And that's pretty open ended. So, in any avenue of life, any experiences that you've had, what has it taught you about the concept of love?
Okay, so I think the most important thing to know about love is it's unconditional. You don't want people in your life to be with you who don't love you, because it stops you finding other people who do, and it stops them finding who they need in order to be able to give that to someone else.
Hmm.
So, so often people feel they need to be in relationships for all the wrong reasons. I also believe love starts with your relationship, your first relationship with it, which is yourself.
Yeah.
If you get that right, then it's very much easier for you to have boundaries. It's much easier for you to be clear about what you need and to be able to articulate that. Because, you know, people can't read our minds. And often we want this love and we can't understand why we're getting it. Well, maybe they just haven't figured out what it is that you want, you know? Um, but for me, it's unconditional and it's live and let live. And I think it's really interesting. I learned a few years ago that you can, if you can imagine love as three different separate sets of, I'm going to do circles, right?
Yeah.
So if you got, I don't know if everyone's going to be able to see this, but if you can imagine two circles and one is placed over the other like this, that can be a kind of codependency relationship where one can't do anything without the other.
Mm.
Um, and so that's one kind. And I not necessarily think that's the best kind of relationship you need. Then if you imagine a circle and then there's a little circle inside that circle, where that's more of a power-based relationship where one person controls the other. One may want to be controlled by the other um, or not. And again, that's not healthy. I think relationships need to be like this: two
Mm.
separate circles where each one is complete and they exist side by side, where each can live their purpose, do what they need to do, and have the freedom to do that in a way that's not going to hurt somebody else, but that they don't feel the need to restrict someone. And it's exactly the same for the other. For me, that's what we should be aspiring for. It's not looking for someone to fill us up. It's looking for someone to complement us so that we can both can shine in that relationship. And for me, that's what love is. It's really being able to be true to yourself, be yourself around the person that you love and not having to try and be someone else or walk on eggshells, you know, because you're scared to say what you need to say.
Yeah.
And also it's about lifting and encouraging and empowering that other person as much as you can so that each shines in that relationship. For me, that's what love is. And again, if I think about children, they teach you unconditional love. You'll do more for your children often than you'll put up with your partner. So I think that's yeah, everything comes back to love and quality relationships,
Yeah.
and relationships, getting them right are so important because they're a fundamental cornerstone of both our physical and mental health. Because we always know when they feel great, but we also know how bad they feel when they're going wrong.
I've never seen that representation before with the circles and everything like that. I'm gonna steal that one.
Hey, you do spread it around the world, because
I
that's all
will.
I'm doing. I'm just sharing it too. I learned it somewhere else. So yeah, I think it's really powerful.